Hi, my name is Kevin Thompson, and we are Group 3, and we will be covering Chapter 9 today, with where we got out of it as the single source of truth. So what we're going to be covering today is we're going to be talking about how to make that single source of truth. One of those ways is by making environments better. Another one is changing the developer mindset of done, and what is the definition of done. Another one is just making the infrastructure easier. And then finally, all these things can help us have that single source of truth. And then among our group, we also talked a lot about how this whole process is how similar it is to the gospel. So we'll be going to be covering that. Kim will be covering that at the very end. So the first thing, environments. Well, what are environments? Environments are what a developer or testers or anybody in the development application cycle uses to create software in a safe environment. So there's different ones. There's ones that the developers use. There's different ones that quality assurance uses. There's some that the user acceptance testing is done in. And then there's staging environments and even production. Production is where the user is actually using it. So in this process, we need to make environments just easier to create. This makes it easier to, it encourages everybody in that process to just make it, not make their own, not try to design it from scratch. No, just create a new one. The easiest way to do this is, and this is where the DevOps team comes in, is we automate it. We make it to where it's really easy. A few clicks of a button, we have a virtual, dev lane we can create, or a virtual, UAT lane. All environments though, regardless of who's using it, we want to make it as close to production as possible. This makes it to where any application we develop is, when it does get put in production, there's less variance in what's going to happen. This is done in many ways to include simulating external applications that could be interacting with it, to credentials, to whatever. We just want to make it as close to production as possible so we can do that. We also run into the problem of several teams, especially in bigger companies, where this team will be working, team A will be working on something, and team B needs to know what team A is doing because they need to have the latest versions and commits. So we need to make sure that those environments are set up to where everybody's working off the same thing, and that just reduces errors and bugs in the end. This will encourage a change in mindset, especially in developers, to where the definition of what the coding means and what the definition of done is. And we're not in waterfall. We don't just do our part as as a developer and then throw it over the wall. And the QA doesn't do their part and do it over the wall. No, what we need to change the mindset is all the environments. We need to be aware of all the environments so that we have this idea that it needs to work in all the lanes that are going down, not just ours, just our piece of the pie. No, we need to have a team mindset. Um, and so that's my portion. I'll be turning it over to Hiram.
Thanks, Kevin. Now I'll be talking about how easy it is to rebuild an infrastructure rather than to repair it. When applications go wrong, developers can spend a lot of time trying to, first of all, find where the program infrastructure has failed, when it went wrong, and then proceed with the repairs. Or they could quickly just rebuild and recreate the application and the environment, which is what nearly all large-scale web operations do. There's something called the immutable infrastructure. When it comes to production environments, manual changes are no longer allowed. The version control changes are only allowed when the code and the environments are created from scratch. This way there are no inconsistencies that enter into the production. What other companies are also doing is preventing uncontrolled configuration variances, where remote logins to production servers are disabled or routinely not allowed. This ensures that there are no more manually applied production changes. This pushes everyone to apply their changes correctly, which is through version control. In order to keep pre-production environments up to date, developers need to stay running on most current environments. They need to be frequently updated in order to find problems at the earliest part of an application. You always want to move forward, never go backward. Now we'll go ahead and pass it on to Kim.
Thanks, Hiram. Kim here, and I'm going to talk to you about the single repository of truth for all systems, not just code. Really, what a single repository of truth really means is that everything that's related to a project, an environment, a system is all in one place, from concept to code to commit. They're meant to house everything, really from code to all the documentation, all of the snapshots of your database, all of your versioning of the environment. When you have a single repository of truth for all systems, it really is easier to maintain the fidelity of the code versions. In the reading, the example of Google and their issues that they had with what was in production every time that they did a new version, they weren't keeping track of version control, and it really spelled disaster for them. So once they got all of their versioning correct in their repository, then their deployments were faster and more efficient. And it's easier to automate tasks and processes with a single repository, and of course easier to debug. So how is the fidelity of the code or the code version maintained? Well, in a case where you have a company where there's more than one developer, which is more than likely out there, many developers can be writing bits and pieces of code, but it all gets stored into one place or committed into one place. And GitHub is kind of a great example that I've learned to use since being at BYU Idaho for the last 3 years. GitHub is a great way to collaborate. It maintains version control and fidelity of the code version. Because each commit is saved. And with your master repository, you've got your local clone on your machine, and everybody else has their own clone. But you can also branch off from that. And those, of course, are called repository branches. And there can be many branches as part of a single repository. There's different types of objects or services that can be a part of the repository. As I mentioned earlier, documentation for your projects. Everything goes in there. So this really enables the complex systems to be managed more easily and more efficiently. So, we've been doing some gospel parallels these last couple of weeks, and so we're continuing on with that. What is done as far as the gospel, and really what does it mean? Well, from an eternal perspective, we're never done, because we're always learning, we're always growing. We grow in knowledge, and the depth of our spiritual knowledge grows. From a mortal perspective, what does done mean? Well, it doesn't mean when you actually die or your spirit leaves your body. What done means, in my perspective, or what I think from a moral perspective, means enduring with a purpose, and just doing all that we can do, and we know that the Lord and the atonement makes up the rest. The on-demand access that we learned about this week, we do have on-demand access to the gospel. The media access that we have now is unprecedented and still evolving. It continues to blow my mind. We have Inspired Revelation about how that gospel how the gospel is being accessed. You know, we've got the media presence. Our LDS.org site is amazing. Our LDS media sites are amazing. You've got the Mormon channel and other media outlets that, you know, explain what the gospel is and shows from a human perspective that, you know, Mormons are people too. We're just like everybody else, you know. Lately, we've received inspired revelation about how the gospel is taught, how we teach each other, and how we minister to each other, which is just awesome. The single repository for truth for all gospel systems. Well, we know what that is. You know, that's the scriptures. That is revelation that comes through the Lord's representative on earth, the prophet, and the apostles and other general authorities. You know, the gospel is the single repository of truth. You know, the gospel is the same everywhere in the world. It's taught the same. It's ministered the same. All the ordinances are the same. The lessons are the same. It really is a great example of having a single repository. And the infrastructure is sound, and it never needs to be rebuilt or repaired, because the gospel is perfect for us in our day. That doesn't mean that it hasn't evolved the way that we receive the gospel or teach the gospel. That's not the infrastructure I'm talking about. What I mean is, you know, our days, the last days, we've received revelation and inspired revelation for us in these last days that, you know, people 100 years ago or 150 years ago really probably wouldn't be able to receive it in the same way that we do, because they didn't have the same experiences that we do. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. And that is the conclusion of this week's presentation. Thank you.